everybody. It's Mark Schultz here, and I'm with my co-host, Larry Little. Good morning, Larry. How are you?
Hey, Mark. Excited to be with you again, you and our audience again this morning. So thank you.
Great.
Yeah.
Hey, everybody. We have another live broadcast this morning, and you know that Larry and I are passionate about the subject of recovery in aviation. We have a live stream here this morning, and we're going to have a guest that I'm going to tell you about in a minute. But I wanted to remind you that this is live, and we would ask you if you would please to share this broadcast.
Yeah.
And remember, you can ask questions during the broadcast in the comment boxes below. We see them directly, and we're able to respond and interact with you directly. It's really fun. Hey, before we get going here, I wanted to remind you is that we've had such success in this recovery in aviation broadcast that we're doing a virtual event, a virtual conference on August 25th, 26th, and 27th. And it's going to be a really exciting event where we have almost 50 speakers like the one we have today that have been lined up to speak on the subject of recovery in aviation. And we're going to be focusing on thought leadership that's going to help you to be successful in accelerating aviation forward. August 25th, 26th, and 27th. You can sign up and register for the event at recoveryinaviation.com. We are really super excited about having you there. And today, let's talk about the broadcast that we have going today. Larry, it should be good. Larry, I understand that we have a former colleague of yours that's going to be on the broadcast today.
Yes, we do, Mark. This morning we have Dr. Marilyn Just. And, you know, I had the opportunity of being a student of Dr. Marilyn at Seattle at the leadership program at Seattle University. And I'll just say it was a life-changing educational experience for me, Dr. M. And we're just really excited to have you with us this morning. You know, we at these broadcasts, we talk about technical stuff and digital transformation, but leadership is such a foundation for moving forward with recovery in aviation. It's just really exciting to have you with us this morning. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Larry and Mark. Larry, it's good to see you again. Mark, thank you for inviting me to do this. I look forward to talking with you.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. I'm glad you're here with us. And so for those of you that may not have caught it, this is Dr. Marilyn Gist, all right? And she is a speaker, author, educator, and she was formerly at the University of Washington and Seattle University. And now she is, like I said, speaker, author, educator, and she's out promoting new ideas and things that she's learned over the years from that. Now, Marilyn, I'm excited to have you here with us today. I appreciate you being here. I understand that you have a book that's coming out soon on the extraordinary power of leader humility. That's the title of it, right?
Right.
Yeah, and this is a subject, I guess, that you've been passionate about, and so much so that you decided that you wanted to write a book about this topic.
Correct.
Yeah, that's great. Hey, let's have a bit of a chat about it. Is that can you just start out by telling us a little bit about what is leader humility? I know that there's a lot of people out there that watch this broadcast that are leaders in the industry, okay? And you have a lot of words to say about that. Can you just give us a quick overview as we go into more detail later about what is leader humility?
Yes. I define leader humility as a tendency to feel and display a deep regard for others' dignity. It's that simple. A tendency to feel and display deep regard for others' dignity. And dignity is self-worth. We all have and need a sense of self-worth. So it's for leaders to understand the value of that and to speak and act in ways that support others' dignity. It's proven to be a real secret for success.
And we definitely need a secret for success right now. So Larry, the reason that we're doing these broadcasts on recovery in aviation, right, Larry, is that you and I believe firmly that it's enthusiastic leaders in the industry that are moving forward with engagement and with belief that are driving success, and they will accelerate the recovery of aviation. So for those of you that are out there might be asking, you know, why are we bringing in a topic of leadership when we're talking about recovery in aviation? Well, that's a key element of success in the recovery of aviation is strong leadership. Larry,
Mark, you're spot on. And, when we talked about this, with Dr. M before the broadcast today, it just struck me, leaders are stressed out. Their employees are stressed out. Their customers are stressed out. And this idea of humility and respect is just so important right now, probably more important than it's ever been to be successful in this recovery and to be able to look positively forward, not cry in your beer looking back, but forward. And I think it's just a great message.
Yeah. Dr. Marilyn, I understand that I keep hearing Larry refer to you as Dr. M. That sounds a little bit informal, isn't it?
That's fine. That's fine, Mark.
Referred to her as Dr. M
Let's have an informal discussion with Dr.
Sure.
M. Okay, all right. So Dr. M, I wanted to ask you this: is that Larry was talking about how people are struggling, a bit in the industry today. Now,
Absolutely.
I understand that over your career that you saw a lot of struggles in leadership. Can you talk to us a little bit about those struggles that you saw?
Sure. Sure. One of the earliest tip-offs actually came from some people at Boeing. I was running the executive MBA programs at University of Washington for 5 years. And in the day, a lot of students were sponsored by the company. So we had a share of Boeing students and they were on our board. And the people on the board would say to us year after year, we send you some of our really bright upcoming or current leaders, and they come out 2 years later and they're smarter. They understand finance and marketing, but they can't lead any better than when we sent them to you. Can't you fix that? So that really was the initial tip-off for me for aviation and a number of other industries. And I began to watch which students would come in and listen to some things then that they were saying about their companies and some of the leadership they worked with. And what was really interesting was they began to sort into people who really were alive and energized and giving their all to their companies, and people who were kind of going through the motions. And I was fascinated by what seemed to make that difference, because the students I was seeing, these are all executive students, they're people like yourself. They were just as competent from one group to the next, but they weren't as energized and motivated. So I went down a path and eventually had this epiphany that there was a set of behaviors that fall under this thing called leader humility that really made the difference. And Mark, I'll just mention briefly that there is a fair amount of research that we just have not paid attention to that has been pointing the way to this for quite some time.
So I understand that that engagement of employees is reasonably low. I think you've done some studies on that subject, haven't you?
Well, the Gallup organization does an annual study on engagement, and they look at it across the U.S. They do tens of thousands of surveys of employees. The latest data we have was through 2018, end of 2018. We haven't seen the 2019 data yet. And it showed that engagement in the U.S. Was at an all-time high. It was an entire point above the year before. And that
so that's like 60%, right? 60%?
34%. 34%. That was the high.
34%.
What that means is that only 34% of the people across industries, across companies, are fully engaged in their work. The way Gallup defines it, most people, the 66%, are coming to work, doing the least they have to do to get by, and are cognitively disengaged. And if they had an opportunity to take another job, they most likely would. Think about the loss of productivity we have.
It's mind-blowing to me because, Larry, we're sitting around asking ourselves is that how do we increase revenue and increase profitability of businesses and reduce expenses? And you're telling me that on the average that there's 66% an opportunity that exists right there because employees aren't completely engaged. That's what you're saying.
Imagine if you could capture an additional 10 or 20% of productivity more beyond that out of the people who are working with you. If you could get their hearts and minds engaged, their full creativity, they can move mountains.
So you saw, Mark, over the last few weeks, one of the key messages we've heard from leaders is they've talked about protecting revenue and protecting the top line and bottom line. And what you're talking about, Marilyn, is a direct impact of both the top and bottom line in these businesses.
Absolutely. There's
So
this saying, yeah, I know we've all heard the saying that, your people are your most important asset.
yes.
I take that to another level. I would say they're not your most important asset. They are your organization, period. Your people are your company. They are your organization. Now, I know in aviation, you've got, capital assets as well, but they don't make a company for you. And so when you really think about how do we drive the top line, how do we preserve the bottom line, it's got to happen through people.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so if engagement is so important in this process, okay, and it's important that people understand and recognize that engagement is important. Now, how does that relate to a leadership and a leadership style? How do we get from disengaged employees to a leader that can engage employees? Help me draw a bridge.
Sure. The bridge in my mind, and what I would draw for you, is pretty simple but overlooked, and it's that leadership is a relationship.
Yeah.
It's a relationship, right? And it's important to understand it's not just with employees, it's with all stakeholders. So depending on the kind of business you have, your stakeholder groups will be different, but leaders are typically dealing with not just employees, but they're dealing with senior management boards, they're dealing with customers, clients, they've got supply chain vendors, they have regulators, they have community members or activists that are impacted by the operation, and on and on and on. And they have a relationship with each of these groups, each of these people, and it could be a good one, a bad one, or a so-so one. But the nature of that relationship the leader has is what's going to drive how engaged people are.
Marilyn, I like your message around it's not just the employees, right? It's that whole value stream that you need to protect, nurture, and have a relationship with. It's your employees, yes, but it's your customers and it's your suppliers. And I think all of them, and just being real and engaged in a relationship sort of view is a little bit different and really powerful.
Right. And so when you think of that, Larry, where it takes me next is that leaders create the container for the work, right? They're getting the processes and the programs and the people together to do it. And they need to draw a boundary that's big enough to include all of their stakeholders, not walling some of them out and saying, well, we want to go in this direction and that group doesn't necessarily agree. So let's just figure it out and then we'll tell them. And that's a recipe for failed implementation. At the very best, troubled implementation. It's probably not going to be a sustainable implementation. So if you draw the boundary to begin with so that those stakeholders are in and they contribute to coming up with one overarching vision, you're going to have much more success. You're protecting their dignity.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep.
Now, Dr. M, you had supplied us with just a couple of little graphics which were helping us to a little bit describe sort of, what this really means. Can you talk to us a little bit about, leader humility and what this graphic represents?
Sure. So when I first started interviewing for the book, I interviewed a number of CEOs of fairly renowned companies. And it was interesting to hear their perspective on it. And I found that a small number of them confused it with meekness. And these were leaders I selected because they were known for their humility. But when I would say, so let's talk about your leader humility, they would almost go, oh, no, that's meekness. Well, in fact, the way I'm defining humility as feeling and displaying a deep regard for others' dignity has nothing to do with meekness. It is a confidence that allows you to know who you are and be centered in that, and at the same time to consider the partners you're dealing with as valuable enough for you to care about their sense of self-worth. So you can disagree on policy or direction. You could still have really strong standards and goals, but you can hold the other person's self-worth as something to be honored. It's very different than arrogance at the other end. And I've kind of colored these as close as I could to a traffic signal of, red, green, and yellow. Meekness doesn't work. You need confidence as a leader, but you also need humility. And you want to avoid arrogance. If I could have the next slide, I think it would clarify why we want to avoid arrogance. Humility and arrogance are really going in different directions. Arrogance is very self-focused. You think of people who are arrogant, they tend to boast or brag. They're concerned about their own advancement, their own status. Part of what led me to some of the leaders I interviewed was hearing these highly engaged employees say things like, well, this person has all these great awards, but, they don't even have a reserved parking space, or, they never talk about themselves. Arrogant people put it out there. They're focused on having you notice their accomplishments. And you can certainly have pride in that, but what a humble leader does is to be concerned about other people's accomplishments and achievements and put at least as much focus on that. So humility and arrogance kind of go in opposite directions.
Yeah. So, Dr. M, is that you described that you routinely saw people coming into your program and they were not necessarily getting it or going back and being as effective. And so you saw there was continued challenges, and you began to sort of sort these things out into understanding what the attributes for success were. Was there kind of a point in time where you just said, this is it. It's leader humility. This is what I have to talk about in order to be able to engage people, in this topic? Was there a place where that puzzle piece started to fit together for you?
Yeah, I began to notice it, and I was kind of dipping my toe in the water, interviewing some of these great leaders, the ones that our executive students, would come into the program and sing the praises of. And it's one thing when you get a student or two, but I'll tell you, Mark, as someone who's done consulting and speaking in a lot of organizations, you get to look under the tablecloth a little bit. You really hear a lot of unsolicited comments and pick up a lot of what's going on in the culture and with the leaders there. And so I began to want to talk with some of these the leaders that I thought were exemplars. And one of them, when I asked a question of, we had talked about humility and how he brought it into his leadership. And then at one point I said, do you think this is something that can be taught? And he said, yes. And he said, you do that. That's why we send people to your program. That's one of the real takeaways, is they come out the other end with some humility. So that was when I began to think, Mark, wow, maybe I can take this to a broader scale, because I think we have a need for great leadership in so many sectors. When we look at some of the major challenges that we have in our world, we need people to be able to work together. And that means focusing on that relationship and bringing enough humility to it to collaborate with other people.
Yeah, Larry, I wanted to make a quick comment here. Both you and I lived in Denver, and I'll just give a shout out to the school I went to. I went to the executive MBA program at the University of Denver, and it was an outstanding program. I'm certain, Dr. M, if I would have lived in Seattle at the time, I would have gone to your program.
Oh, absolutely.
And Larry, I understand that you were in that executive MBA program as well, correct?
Graduate of 2012.
Fantastic.
Yes.
That's great. And so as both you and I, being individuals who have gone into programs, such as that, we were both around a lot of people. I'm not certain how many were in your cohort, but I think there were 50 or so in my cohort. And, they were all very senior leaders. You had to have 10 plus years of experience to be in that program. And what I wanted to do, though, is I wanted to ask this question is that we have people watching right now who are saying, why is this subject relevant to me right now? Okay. All right. And I'll just say that I was 30 years into my career when I decided that I was not leading people. I needed something more. I needed to be able to learn more how to lead people better when I went to the executive MBA program. And Larry, what was the reason why you went back into that kind of a situation or scenario, academic scenario yourself?
Well, I think for me, I was maybe just a little bit stalled in my career. And I think my focus was kind of like what Marilyn talked about before. It was more around numbers and around performance, but not around relationships and people. And I think I kind of was a little bit reflective and said, I need to change my leadership style if I'm going to be successful, if I'm going to change people's lives. So that's kind of what motivated me. But, you know, it kind of brings me to a question, Marilyn. What sort of things should a leader be thinking about to be able to embrace the concepts that you're talking about here? You know, just I looked through your book a little bit, but there's some questions that a leader should be kind of thinking about to kind of start the process to understand what humility means. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Sure, Larry. I think a starting point is that whenever we see a new leader, we get told that, you know, someone's been hired who's going to run our part of the organization, or, you know, we've got elections coming up, so we may see some changes at local and national levels, whatever. But whenever we're faced with a new leader, there tend to be three questions that pop in our mind. So can I have that slide? So it's, who are you? And by that, it's like, let me get past your name and your title. Who are you really? That's what I want to know, because you have some power, and the way in which you are using that or will use that is going to affect me. So I want to know who you are. I want to know what your stuffing is, what you're made of. I want to know where we're going. You know, what are you going to ask me to do? I've got, you know, some priorities and some interests, and I kind of have my ears perked to find out where we're going. And then the third one is, do you see me personally, who I am, how I'm made, what my values and interests and needs are? So those are kind of three prime questions we have of any new leader or any leader we meet for the first time. And we watch and we listen. And we don't necessarily ask these questions out loud. We just have them in our hearts.
Right.
And as we're watching and listening, we pick up on signals from the leader that give us the answers we're seeking. So if I'm the leader, I'm mirroring this so that who I am, you know, my character, my personality, answers your question of who are you. The direction I set answers your question of where we're going, and then how I treat you answers your question of, you know, do you see me? So,
you know, the one that just really speaks to me is that, do you see me?
Yes.
And especially now when there's, you know, an election coming up, the coronavirus, you know, there's aviation, like I said, people are really stressed, and just being able to be sensitive to their emotions and their feelings and their dignity is, you know, is so important right now.
Absolutely. People are in one stage or another as we go through what has been a very traumatic year, Larry. And we're having a shared experience, but it is affecting all of us in different ways. Some of us much more seriously than others. And so as a leader, we need to have a sensitivity to the dignity that people are bringing into the workplace, you know, and I won't run down all the different ways. I think we see enough in the media. But what I do think is important is to realize that my situation as a leader might be much different than someone who's working for me, and that person A's situation can be very different than person B. And I need to be able to relate to each of those individuals in all my stakeholder groups, at least understanding that we're all going through some level of trauma. Life is not what we thought it would be when we started 2020, right?
Right. You're so right. And I, you know, the other thing I was just going to add is, we got a saying at Boeing that leaders are people too.
Yes.
You know, that.
Yes.
And Mark, we always talk about being positive and moving forward. And what we're talking about here are some things to help you continue that positive look, take care of yourself, because leaders are people too, and really be positive for your organization to be able to move forward and be successful.
Absolutely.
You know, Marilyn, I wanted to just share a quick story with you and just take a minute. And the reason I want to do this is because it's sort of an epiphany moment for me where I understood that respecting people's dignity was the way to engage with people and create employee engagement is that I used to develop land in Denver, Colorado. I used to build shopping centers. And, one time we had a shop that was going to open.
Mark, is there anything you haven't done? Sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
One time we had a shop we were going to open the next morning, and we were working all night long into the early hours of the morning, and I was there with the construction workers. And one of the guys came up to me and he said, do you know why we're here? It's about 2 o'clock in the morning. And I said, because we have to open in the morning. And he said, no, we're here because of you. Okay. Yeah. And that was an epiphany to me is that I had developed a relationship with those people, with those laborers and those construction workers. And they were there because that was important to me, that we were going to open on time in the morning. It wasn't because they were being paid. It wasn't because it was a job. They didn't have to be there. They were there because we had developed a loyalty, and I respected them for who they are and what they did. Yeah.
And I have seen so much of that in my own leadership. I mean, I made some mistakes early in my career as a leader. Hopefully learned from those as well as from some of yours. But, the latter day opportunities I've had to lead teams drew that kind of response, Mark. And it was because I made a conscious effort to really display regard for their dignity. And when you do that, unfortunately, it's uncommon.
Yeah.
It's not that common that leaders behave that way. And so when you do, people just really perk up, and they will give their very best to the job.
Yeah. Marilyn, sometimes it's almost easier to be arrogant than it is to be caring in a relationship. And, these relationships take a little bit of nurturing and might, and a little bit of thought, but arrogance is a little bit easier sometimes.
It can be. I like to think that people lack the knowledge of what that does. And so I've seen so many managers, when they're under pressure, respond by kind of tightening the screws, if you will, and they get a little more authoritative and command and control, induce fear. They think if they put the pressure on, that's going to make people move faster and get to where they want to go. When if they were to say, hey, let's sit down and talk about this. We're behind and we need to get to goal. And here's why. Here's how it's going to affect all of us. Can I get your engagement and your commitment? That goes so much farther. And then doing a check-in with the team. If you can get people to say, okay, let's check in on this maybe every week. Alan Mulally, of Boeing, before he went to Ford, sort of codified this business process review in his working together management system. And it was just that. Let's create one overarching goal for the organization and have everybody be part of the team. And let's do a very regular weekly check-in on how we're all doing, so we hold each other accountable. That works so much better, I think.
Yeah.
Dr. M, I think we have a slide which talks a little bit about the practical steps to moving forward. Can we talk about that a little bit? Can we talk about, what does somebody really have to do to apply these extraordinary power of leader humility? How do they do that?
So the slide you're looking at now shows those three original questions, 3 prime questions I talked about. And below that in parentheses, kind of how the leader's behavior mirrors that back. But then you'll notice that there's a couple buckets under each of those 3. And those are what I call the 6 keys to leader humility. So when I think about who I am, from the standpoint of someone else's dignity, the 2 prime behaviors or key behaviors are, do I have a balanced ego? This gets at the arrogance versus meekness. So you want to be that confidence with humility that allows me to care about your dignity as well as myself, my needs, my goals. And if I can care about your dignity, I tend to show more gratitude and appreciation for the work that you're doing, the ways that you're stepping up to the challenge, for example. I'll give you credit for things that you do well. Often public credit if that's appropriate. Another one is robust integrity, and that should be self-explanatory. Do you walk the talk? Do you, can I trust you? Can I count on your word? Will you come through for me and for the team the way you say you will? So those two things are the main things that drive people's perception that who you are as a leader is healthy and wholesome. And they will engage more if you have those two things. In the middle, in terms of the direction you set, the first one really is compelling vision. Now, that might sound like, wow, if I can create this great idea for forward movement, we'll get there. The trick in this is that, in my view, a vision is not compelling unless it serves the needs of all of your stakeholder groups. So that's where leaders really have to engage in some of the messy work of pulling people together, listening, getting them to listen respectfully to each other so they can hear, we don't all agree. We're not all going to agree, but part of the leader's role is to facilitate that conversation and out of that quagmire to extract something that is a direction we all say, I can live with that. I think that's good. Some people may think it's great, but even the ones who have reservations should feel, yeah, I can get behind this. So at that point, your vision is compelling, and everybody wants to pull forward for it. And then you need ethical strategies, obviously. I once worked for a boss where I told him that what he wanted me to do was illegal, and he said, you need to remember who's paying your check. About disengagement. I really went home, and I was fairly young at that time. I was in my late 20s, but I went home and I really had to think through, am I going to do something I know is illegal because the vice president has told me I need to pay attention to that? So I decided to kind of, budget, not do it, but make it look like it accidentally didn't happen. And a few months later, I left the organization. So I think ethical strategies are really important to people as well in terms of the direction you set. And then we come to the part that Larry said is the most important. And I tend to think so too. And that's the do you see me question, which gets to how I treat you as a leader, or how I as a leader treat you. And there's two main keys to that. One being generous inclusion. And there's a lot of talk today about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's certainly inclusion in that context. But I mean inclusion of all stakeholders. So are you including those people in decisions that are going to have a significant impact on them? Are you bringing them in for discussions when it really matters, as opposed to doing things behind closed doors and then dangling a largely tangential question to make them feel that they're included, or calling an all hands meeting and saying, well, I included people? It's really about including people when it really matters, and especially when it's going to matter to them. So being generous about that as opposed to stingy. And then the final piece is having a long-term, having a focus on the person's long-term interests. So on an employee level, it could be, what is that person's career aspirations? Are there things that I could do to help develop that person or coach them? Are there referrals I could make to a supplier? Maybe we can't use them right now, but I know some other people they could market to. So in whatever ways we can, thinking about people less transactionally and more as a relationship, and how can I help their long-term development. So that is an important element of how I treat you.
So, Marilyn, have you seen examples, over your career of people that you thought were, extraordinarily good at doing this?
Yes, I have.
Yeah.
And I include a number of the people. I interviewed a dozen CEOs, as I said, for the book. I'll give one example. Well, I'll give two. One is Alan Mulally. 2014, he was named by Forbes as the #3 most influential leader in the world, right behind the Pope and Angela Merkel. And that was for his turnaround of Ford Motor Company without any bailout funds. He had galvanized several 100,000 employees globally, took a company that was losing 17 billion the year he took over and turned it into a very profitable, award-winning brand. And he had done something very similar when he was president of Boeing Commercial Airplanes. So I think you have to look at. I mean, Alan has really strong drive. There's nothing soft and weak about his leadership, but he does it with a style of humility that really embraces everybody's dignity and brings everybody into the fold as part of the leadership team, sets expected behaviors that he holds himself and everyone else accountable for, that include things like people first, listen and respect each other, and so forth. Another example I'll give is not from aviation, but it's Jim Sinegal, who was co-founder and for decades CEO of Costco Wholesale, currently 240,000 or so people globally. And the interesting thing about that company is that they grew without ever having an advertising budget. They don't advertise. They get lots of positive media attention. But Jim has always focused on delivering value for the employees and for the customers. And I have seen so many Costco people come through programs at the University of Washington and Seattle U who would just go to the ends of the earth for that company and have nothing but positive things to say about its leadership. So when you see this as a style that drives success at major organizations, it's not a backwater concept. It can certainly help smaller organizations too. And part of what I do in the book is tease that apart into operating principles that work for organizations of any size.
Marilyn, what a great story of Alan. For me, 40 years at Boeing, a lot of leaders, but I can tell you, there's no one more respected at Boeing than Alan Mulally.
Yeah.
With this beaming smile and tough questions and just the charisma was just overflowing with the guy. And so what you're saying is just spot on.
Yeah.
Larry, tell me why. Why is that?
Because I wasn't around Alan very much, but he certainly had a presence any room that he walked into with look you straight in the eye and be able to have a conversation that wasn't threatening, that was inclusive, and it was never this. We had a guy who ran the company right after who was a professional CEO and I think one of his, he had some quotes about fear in employees, and you never got that feeling from Alan. He always. It seemed like he really cared about the relationship and what you could contribute.
Definitely.
Yeah, that's great. Hey, listen, so these are really all just really amazing, concepts and thoughts. And, as we kind of wrap things up here in our broadcast today, I wanted to ask you can you help us, is that we have people in the industry here, who are watching and who are struggling with their businesses today. And Marilyn, Dr. Anna, as we bring this broadcast to a conclusion, is that, what's some parting advice that you would give to people out there in the industry that are saying, we're trying to figure out what to do in order to be able to accelerate the recovery of the aviation and to be able to create more success? Can you give us a few ideas on what people should be doing in order to be able to accelerate recovery in their businesses?
So there's two things I would suggest. One is that I've talked about a set of keys that will help you display humility to your employees, and that will energize them to a great extent, improve their engagement, which gives you more productivity. But there's another piece of this, and I think many leaders underestimate just how much employees are close to knowledge and can help, can offer creative ideas that will actually work. And I would recommend that you pose the challenges to them as well and ask them, how can we solve this problem together? How can we collectively accelerate this recovery? Can you think of anything we're not doing that we could be doing better, or something we are doing that maybe we should do less of? And you can always set the boundaries and parameters for discussion, like, I'd like for us to go to the moon, but we don't have the budget to do that. So within these constraints, can you help me solve the problem? My experience is in not only my own, but in working with many other leaders, is that is the path forward. Some leaders are very afraid to show, and it's almost as if they think it's a weakness if they go to the team or even to their customers and look as if they don't have all the answers. The world's too complicated anymore for any of us to have all the answers. You almost look less competent if you try to present as if you do. So there's certainly no harm in showing that. And I think if you show up in a way that says, yes, I'm the leader, but you play an important role. Let's figure this out together. You're going to get that extra 10 or 20% that we wanted to get from engagement and productivity.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Dr. M, at the top of the program, we had indicated that you have a book coming out in about 6 weeks, and it's called The Extraordinary Power of Leader Humility. If people want to get that book, where is it going to be made available?
It is available for pre-sale now at your favorite online outlets. So Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Indie Books, Barrett Kohler is the publisher. They have it too. So just about any place that retails online should have it. You could click on my website, marilynjist.com. There's a page for ordering it, or it has the links to all of the different sites you can order there.
Excellent. That's great. And then for those of you that are watching, we also wanted to share with you that our upcoming Recovery in Aviation Conference on August 25th, 26th, and 27th, Marilyn, Dr. M, has graciously agreed to be one of the interview speakers as part of that conference. And like we had said, we have over 50 people that are planned to be there. Now, Larry, I wanted to point out
50 speakers. Hey, Mark, that's 50 speakers, not 50
speakers.
people.
Sorry, 50 speakers. We're expecting about 10,000 participants right now, but Dr. M would be one of 50 speaker participants, okay? And I wanted to point out that, Larry, that you and I have talked about digital transformation for years, and we've said that belief and people are the first two pillars of that. Belief, people, processes, and technology. And what we're talking about here is leaders having belief and leveraging, the power of their skills and the people around them in order to be able to be two of those major pillars. And, I wanted to encourage you to engage in this concept of leadership, because we firmly believe that it's leaders that are moving forward enthusiastically and are going to make a difference in the recovery in aviation. And that's why we have this conference coming up. You can register for the conference at recoveryinaviation.com, and it's coming up on August 25th, 26th, and 27th. And I wanted to challenge you to be part of that. Hey, Dr. M, thank you for sharing just a little bit here today. Those of you out there watching, go pre-order that book. There's a lot of good concepts in there, and we're looking forward to seeing you, Dr. M, on our upcoming conference. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Good night.
Hey, to everybody out there, I wanted to thank you for joining us in this live broadcast, and I wanted to close up the way we always do and say fair winds and following seas to you, and I challenge you to join our upcoming conference on August 25th, 26th, and 27th. Bye for now, and have a great day. Bye.
Hey, thanks, Mark.
Thank you. Bye. much.